Howdy, folks. Welcome to JJ's Library and Readings. We are back again today with Between Two Fires. Hope y'all are doing well. Um, with me, man, not much going on right now. Uh, but I'm happy to be recording. Uh, you know, just everyday stuff. But I hope y'all came here to escape. I hope you're all comfy in your couch or your bed with some coffee and ready to smoke your cob and get ready for this chapter. Well, actually, first we're starting at the part 2 page. Um, we just finished chapter 8. So, yeah, I'd say let's get into this and then we're going to finish chapter 9. So, part 2. Now the great plague has stilled the hearts of the countryside and darkened the windows of the cities of man. Death's hand sat upon the brow of the king, but also the farmer. Death took the beggar and the cardinal, the money changer and the milkmaid. The babe died on the breast, and sailors brought their ships to port with dead hands, and the wickedness of the man was laid bare. So great of his so great was his fear of this pestilence, for the mother fled her children, and the son nailed his doors shut, and the priest betrayed his flock. Still other men said, God is gone with us, and never was at all. Let us do as we will, and take pleasure as we may, for all is lost. And so the wicked went in bands, and took the daughters' maidenheads, and killed others for their sport. And some shut themselves away in walled halls, and let none pass. When the bread was gone, they drew lots, and some were given to the butcher, that the rest might live. Some righteous men and women yet held faith, but they were scattered so far that none could see the other's light, and it seemed the darkness had no end. And the Lord made no answer. Now devils walked the earth, at first in dreams and then in flesh, and hell had dominion in diverse kingdoms. Those men who died in the further essence of evil yet walked as shades, and even those who died in goodness might be raised by devils and abused. Scared places were turned rotten, and holy men abased. So the seed of Adam would take no comfort, and the prayers of men and women would not strengthen the angels of the Lord, and were grown frail. And the Lord made no answer. Now the greater devils who walked the earth were Run and Ulit, and Belphegor and Balzupth. Those agents were flies. Two-thirds of the fallen had gone even to the walls of heaven, where a great war raged, a war of bent light and thrown stars and noises that killed, a war of great limbs locking in the spear of the sword. It was a war of tooth on a wing, of war machines whose effect were abomination, a war of shaken walls, and a war of hammers that, though turned, broke the arm that held the shield. For the strength of the angels of God was reflected strength, and the source was grown distant. Yet the fallen had sat long in the coals of their exile, and grown hard, and their strength was their own, and their generals were Lucifer, Asmodeus, and Ashtaroth, and Moloch. And the angels who resisted at the gates were Michael and Zophron, and Earl and Raphael, for Gabriel had gone to look for the Lord, but the Lord made no answer. Some few angels of God slipped from heaven by stealth and hid themselves, whether in the fields or in the cities, and worked against the fallen angels as best they could, and to save the lives of men, though they didn't though they did those things in secret, for their powers were ground weak upon the earth. Certain treasures from heaven they hid in the earth as well, in case the walls were breached. And among those pots of oil, incense from heaven's gardens, and nectar, and gold from the trails of the stars, and also they preserved certain tokens of the same time God walked among them. And among those were his sandals, and his crown of thorns, and the nails from his wrists and ankles, and also the spear that pierced his side. It was the hour of the fallen angel, and God had stopped the fountain of his love. And it was said that he had gone and made a new world, and new angels, and new men, and the walls of heaven would fall, and all of these now struggling above and below would perish. of the city of Paris. Paris first announced herself with a column of smoke rising over a hill. They knew they were close. So they had been following the river from the west, and Thomas and the priest wondered in the city might be burning. But they crested the hill, and Thomas felt ashamed for his naivete. The city dwarfed the fire, which was outside the walls in any case. A fire big enough to burn that city would have rivaled the furnaces of hell, and the smoke from it would have blackened the bottoms of the clouds. All that was burning was a wheat field, and the fire was at the end, burning itself out because of the banks of the Seine. Several houses had been reduced to blackened skeletons, as had two cows. One calf, lowered from the hillock, barely visible from behind the curtain of white smoke that surrounded it. The fire would spare this beast. The octet of ragged figures around it, however, would not. Already they were testing the smoking earth to see if it would burn them through the rags and bad shoes on their feet. Already they were hefting their axes and daggers. They didn't look like farmers. Thomas scanned the fields and saw a pair of legs jutting from a patch of unburned wheat. Murder, then. Thomas was suddenly sure that these men had set the fire. He should have waited and watched a little longer before they approached, but it was too late now. Several of the killers looked at the cart as it passed, but nothing in the cart could possibly interest them as much as the calf. One of them looked at Thomas, and he met the man's gaze, not in threat, but to let him know he would fight if he had to. The man quickly assessed that they would take the cart, but not without cost. He looked back up at the hillock. Now Thomas lowered his eyes in shame to remember that, had things fallen out differently, he might be standing in that group along with Godefroy and Jacob, waiting to carve the dead man's calf. I saw it. What? Your soul. Thomas remembered the last winter with Godfrey, when his were the most feared brigands in high Normandy. The better months they had restricted themselves to robbing merchants, particularly on the roads leading south and east towards the Champagne fairs, trundling away carts laden with food and wool on the way down and gold spices on the way up. December came, however, with the rain and sleet of its first and breath that numbered them to their feet. Food reigned scarce, and the reputation now worked against them. What merchants traveled then did so under arms. Villages set watches from them, and hid their grain in caves, and under clever hidden doors, and in the pits of their fields. Their very few coins and other small goods went down wells or in coffers burned under straw. They hid themselves too, because they knew that Godefroy, whom they called the Black Cat, would stop at nothing, even torture, to learn where they hid their meager treasures, and their livestock, which to Godfrey's mind included daughters. In response, Godfrey learned stealth. Near Grissers, just before the Christmas feast began, the brigands stopped outside a village they would all remember, though they never knew its name. 2 men stayed with the horses. The rest waited until almost sundown and walked 2 miles through the woods to the most isolated farmhouse. Everyone inside was likely to be asleep. Peasants slept long hours in the winter to save strength. The thieves muddied their faces and crawled on their bellies until they were close enough to Jacob to shoot the guard dog. The windows were hung with sheepskins so they kept the heat of the fire in, and the cold thieves converted the warmth nearly as much as the food they hoped to find. Coveted. Thomas grabbed his sheepskin and yanked it down, rolling awkwardly towards the window from his sword drawn. A calf lay in the middle of the dirt floor, with a goat and 2 children sleeping against it. They woke up at the sounds of Thomas's heavy feet and stared at him. They thought that the devil from hell had come to them, and that they weren't far wrong. The others slept in as well. One of the children cried out, and the rest of the house woke up. All in one room, 6 adults on a moss-stuffed bed. An old man at the end reached for something on the floor, but a nearly toothless little killer named Pepin leapt the calf and the children in 2 steps and stabbed the man's belly. He dropped whatever he was grabbing for and palmed his wound, huffing, "Oh, oh." The only other men, probably an in-law and a hired man, froze and offered no fight. They were soon shamed by an old woman who swung at Thomas with a fire poker. He ducked it and shoved her down. Where another man sat on her, she yelled at this man, punched her until she stopped. Godfrey noticed that one of those on the bed was a decent-looking girl of perhaps 14, probably already married. He yanked her off the bed by the foot while Pepin hovered over the rest of them with the knife. They took the girl and the beasts out. Thomas carried the goat over his neck, and Jacob led the calf. But the real prize was a milk cow on the other side of the house. They butchered her that night in the hills along with the other animals, smoked the meat, and rode off the local lord before the local lord could muster sufficient men to deal with him. Just before they left, they let the girl stumble back into town, mostly intact on the outside. Thomas had argued with Godfrey about the girl, but in the end had walked away. The meat had gotten them through January. The family, of course, would have been reduced to begging from their neighbors, perhaps even forced to sell their land. As the Brigards left the house that night, the old woman had gotten up and yelled after them from the doorway. Her words were slurred from her newly broken teeth. "God will see you in hell. You're the devil now. May you choke and die and go to him sooner." Normally some of them would have jeered back at her, but her words fell on them with the weight of a proper curse. Robbing peasants felt much more sinful than robbing merchants, but Winter didn't care about such sensibilities. In February, they robbed another farmhouse, and this time the men fought. Pepin was killed, as were the men. Godefroy ordered the house burned. A dark-haired boy, not 5 summers in the world, stood bewildered near the blaze, saying if there had been some mistake, "We live here. We live here." Not 6 months later, the plague had come, killing most of the thieves. And everybody else, nothing matters more. Thomas shook away his ghost and turned his eyes now to Paris. Her walls were the faintly yellowed white of bones, and her turrets stood proudly, each a lazy bowshot from its neighbor. He would see what must have been the Lavore, the king's fortress, strong and white, cut from the same stone as the city walls. The spires of cathedrals poked at the sky, and the roofs of shops and houses tumbled against one another. Even dead, if she was dead, Paris was a lovely corpse. And yet Thomas wished she had burned. He would have embraced any excuse to keep going, as they had been, on small roads or no roads, meeting new, living souls, forging as best they could. How long could they live like that? Until winter. But what then? "I don't care," Thomas said at the end of his chain of thoughts, and neither of his cart mates pressed him for what he meant. There were a great deal in this world not to care about. The Porte de Livreur was the closest gate, and luckily one of the few that remained open. The provost of Paris, on the authority of the king, who had long since fled, had shut most of the other gates in vain attempt to close out the scourge that was killing the city. Rare carts bearing food were allowed in. Anyone at all was allowed out. Strangers could enter so long as they appeared healthy. The guards at the top of the wall did not appear healthy. They were underslept, ashen, and cranky, though not energetic enough to cause much mischief. They told the girl to display her armpits, neck, and groin to them, but did not care to make Thomas strip down his armor, and likewise told the priest to keep his robe on. The priest shook his head at them. One of them apathetically tossed a small stone at the priest. They waved at the cart through. Now would be a good time to tell us what you're looking for," Thomas said. The girl nodded. She looked frightened. She didn't look like she knew anything about why they were here. "The first thing is to find lodging," the priest said. Nobody alive wanted them, but the dead didn't either. They wound through the narrow muddy streets, at turns disgusted by the filth beneath their feet, and awed in the soaring spires of churches or the houses of the very rich. On some streets of the houses, the shops were so close that they nearly touched heads together over the muddy path, throwing everything into a shadow. Some bodies, at least, were being picked up in tumbrils, pushed mostly by desperate-looking fellows who had as much fear from hunger as from the murderous stale air around the dead. Nobody answered at the inns on the right bank, or when they did, it was just to tell them to go away. Most of the people who had gold had already piled their possessions in whatever they could still find with wheels on it, headed for the countryside. The only medical advice that proved sound against the sickness was run far and stay long. Yet even that worked only if you were lucky or well informed enough to run where it hadn't struck yet. And if you were not already sick, the only thing that had slowed its spread was the speed of which it killed. Once it was in you, you had a day or maybe two before you were too sick to travel, or hours. Thus it spread from town to town at the speed of a leisurely walk, but it missed nothing. So they went south on Saint Denis until they got into the bridges that crossed the Seine onto Le Delicet, the island at the heart of the city. The larger of these bridges, the Pont aux Chengurs, was for wheeled vehicles and beasts and had shops along the sides, none of which were occupied. Likewise, nobody was bothered to collect tolls. Between the shops on the right, they could make out the smaller bridge, Ponte Meneurs, which was only for pedestrians and had 13 water mills at its base. Both bridges were wooden. The celebrated stone bridge at the Grand Point was collapsed during the winter flood 50 years ago. At the time, they had seemed the greatest calamity Paris would suffer. Now the mills at the base of the pedestrian bridge regularly spat out corpses that citizens living close to the river had gestured rather than waiting for the cart to come. On the island, they rode past the strong white walls of the royal place, atop which several archers were laughing, firing their bows at something on Rue Saint Barthélemy as they cleared a stack of empty white wine barrels just near St. Barthélemy Church. They saw the target, a very fat dead man with 30 or 40 arrows stuck in him, and more stuck in the mud or lying with their points broken in half from hitting the stone building behind them. They would have to cross the field of fire. "Please, nobody shoot us, brothers," the police called to them. "We don't shoot priests," said one of them. "Well, he doesn't," said the other. "Hey, father, make a circle with your arms, a big circle." The others laughed. They were drunk. "Yes, and put the bastard driving the cart in the middle of it." "Shut up. He looks like a knight." "Knights ride horses." "A glass of cider says he's a knight." "All the more reason to fling a shaft at him. Maybe he's one of the eunuchs that let the English shame us at Crécy." "Don't let Sir Jean hear you." "Fuck him. He went with the king." "You may pass, but hurry up." "Yes, hurry." Thomas urged the mule forward. For a long moment, the only sound was the clop of the mule's hooves on the muddy street. "You wouldn't," one of the archers said. "I dare you," said another. Thomas said, "Don't look at him." An arrow whistled behind their heads and stuck in the man's open mouth. In the dead man's open mouth. "Philip, you did it!" "I work better with obstacles." Past the palace and St. Barthélemy Church, they went right on Rue de la Villette. Oh my goodness! Villette Draperie, and then right on Rue de la Joverie. I think they're all French-inspired words. I'm sorry I'm butchering them so much. I can hardly speak English, but I hope y'all are enjoying either way. Let's continue. Named for Jews now absent, having been expelled from the city yet again nearly 30 years before. Soon seeing the twin towers of Notre Dame off to its left, Thomas tilted his back and spat forward the great cathedral. Watching the white spittle arc and separate in the air, he imagined it was a stone tossed by a true bucket and that it would knock a hole in the gorgeous round window over the door, but it just fell in the mud. They were coming at the southern part of Ile de la Cité, where the Hotel Dieu stood near the petit point that led to the Latin Quarter. The Hotel Dieu would have let any poor travelers stay one night, as was its custom, had the great hospital not been overwhelmed with those dying of the plague. A staggering heap of bodies lay outside awaiting removal, two of them filles blanches, young nuns in white, who had been taking care of the sick. A glimpse through an open door revealed a hell of vomiting, coughing, and sobbing, with a very few wretched figures in white trying to ease the torments of far, far too many. The girl sobbed, and the priest held her. Thomas's hand jerked with the long suppressed reflex to cross himself, but he did not do that. He ground his teeth and shook his head. As they approached the bridge to the left bank, the girl sat up from where the priest had been holding her and looked at the gray waters and the scene rushing under it. A dead sheep floated by, but didn't keep going to the other side. The priest wondered if it had caught on debris down the piers, and if that debris included people, and surprised himself by not feeling anything about it. On the other side of the entrance, on the Latin Quarter, they passed a painted wooden statue of Christ up on a pedestal of stone, at the foot of which a feverish woman grinned, sweating, with a dead cat cradled in her arms. Thomas looked up at the long-headed Christ and said, not wholly under his breath, "You're dead too, aren't you? If not, get off that whoring thing and do something. Or at least whoring wink at me. You can do that much, can't you?" It didn't wink, but the woman did. They wheeled along the butcher's quarter, where the mud stank with the blood and viscera of slaughtered animals, a few of which were still being butchered despite the paralysis that gripped so much of the city. A man grinned a nearly toothless grin at them as he cut the throat of a suckling pig he had just tied up by its feet, its blood jetting out his stiff leather apron and into the pail he had placed beneath it. He called out the price of the pig, but they couldn't hear it over its squeals. The men of Rue de la Blanc Butchery seemed to be doing better than the dyers on Goblins, just nearby where nothing was moving at all. They got lost again in the labyrinth streets and began to despair of finding lodgings. The sun was so low that only infrequently did it finger its way between the buildings to throw golden light on the mud. Just such a draft of light illuminated the foot of a masculine-looking woman. She sat in the doorway of a leaning timber building with flaky paint. A sly-looking young man stood near her, cleaning his nails with a rusty knife. "You look lost," she said to them. The priest looked first at her greasy blue stocking, then up at her tangled hair, and finally at her face. She had the look of a wary mastiff. She also had a mustache that might have been suited a 13-year-old boy. "We are," he said. Thomas noted that she was a big woman with strong hands and shoulders, old enough that the man near her might have been her son, and that she wore a fine hat, a rich man's floppy felt hat with a good gold pin. Doubtless there were fine hats than living heads to fill them in the city after a point it could hardly be considered looting to liberate them. The girl noticed her eyes. They seemed kind to her, despite the woman's rough look. Out of nowhere, she wanted the woman to hold her. It had been so long since she had smelled a woman's skin that even a dirty woman's embrace would have been welcome. She was still disturbed by the sight of the dead young nuns near the hospital, and she wanted a woman to hold her and tell her that the whole world didn't yet belong to death. Masculine death with his hourglass and his holes for eyes. Death with his bony arms that had only embraced to take you away, like a lamp from the market, like the pig on Rue de la Branche. How did heaven come into all of this? Heaven was life, not death. Heaven was a woman holding her head in the crook of her arm and looking down at you. Heaven was a warm hand on your cheek and the smell of soup with garlic on the fire. How could people enjoy anything in heaven with their noses rotted off and their ears full of mud and worms and no cheeks and no hands to lay on cheeks? She had never felt so alone or so confused. "Maybe I can help you. What are you looking for?" She thought she smelled garlic coming from the building. "A bed," the priest said. "A stable? Anything." "You're in luck," the woman said. "I own a few buildings in this neighborhood. The renters all died in one just down the street. You see it there with the big puddle, with the blue door. But it's dry and got 2 decent beds. How much have you got?" "How much do you want?" the priest said. "Oh ho!" said the woman. "You're stumbling around this dead city an hour before dark with your heads up your asses. Lucky anyone says a word to you. And you want things done your way? Are you going to tell me how much you've got?" "Well, no, but I will tell you what we're willing to spend. I'm sure it's not enough, but tell me. I could use a laugh." The last of the sun slipped off her foot and now winkled on a silver spoon hanging from her belt. 10 deniers. "Pah! That's a country priest for you," she said to the young man whose nails didn't really look any cleaner for all his knifing under him. "First time in the big city, eh? All right, how much?" 3 sous. Is this room perhaps in the royal palace? Thomas said. She narrowed her gaze and jerked a thumb at him, looking still at the priest. I don't like him. The priest said. He's a bit gruff at first, but he has a good heart. How about 1 sou, 5 deniers? I'm not the one who has to bargain. It's 3 sous. How do we even know you own the room? Thomas said. If he talks again, I've got nothing else to say. The priest looked imploringly at Thomas, who shrugged and turned his gaze away. Will you show us the room? Said the priest. I'm not getting up. I don't step and fetch for you. How about this young gentleman? Pierre Matthew said, indicating the sly young man. He's busy. May we have the key? When I get the money. May we at least see the key? You may see it, and have it when I get the money. The priest went to the cart and got the coins, which he reluctantly pulled in her mannish hands. She made them disappear, then rummaging in a moldy pouch on her belt, and produced a small brass key, holding it up before the priest. He took it and frowned at it. It looks like a coffer key, not a proper door key. Oh, she said. Am I a liar now as well as your servant? Then give it back to me and go your ways. Go and sleep and shit for all I care. I'm a priest, you know. Then pray for a room. Never mind, we'll take it. But it had better be what you said. Fine. The woman now produced a little piece of ginger, began to chew it. The girl salivated despite herself and asked, Do you have any more, Ginger? The woman shook her head and flickered her hand at them. They left. Maybe 60 yards away, they stopped the cart near a big depression in the road in which a puddle had formed. The priest approached the blue door the woman had indicated and went to fit the key, which was clearly too small, into the lock, but the door opened anyways. The room was mad with flies. 3 badly decomposed bodies lay in the room, which stunk horribly from them, but also from mold. The roof had fallen in. Urine and feces, several pieces of turds lay near the open window. Clearly people sat over the ledge to shit or pissed freely through the opening. The dirt floor also littered with animal bones, eggshells, fish, scales, and all other matter of things. They have been sold the right to sleep in the neighborhood morgue, latrine, and dump. The priest gagged, the girl moaned, and Thomas went to the cart and got his sword, drawing it from its sheath. He ran the 60 worlds back to the stoop, but of course the woman and her companion were not there. He kicked in the door and went into the building, where a young woman grabbed a child he had knocked over with the door. The child screamed and held his head. Another woman he didn't recognize stood frozen near the fire where she had been stirring thin pottage, and now a man grabbed up a meat cleaver. He stood in front of the woman and the child, but too scared of Thomas to move forward. What do you want? Get out, he pleaded, gesturing improperly with the cleaver. The old woman on the stoop. She teased me. What woman? She sold us a bad key. What? You hurt my son. I don't know about a damned key. You're hiding her, Thomas said, but didn't believe himself. The old trickster had nothing to do with these people. The money was gone. The thin-lipped man with a strangely protruding belly came from upstairs with a very old and pitted sword, but he froze too. Rob them. Make them give you what they have. Thomas shook what wicked voice of his head. The man from the stairs licked out towards Thomas with his sword, but he was scared and kept himself well out of range to hit or get hit back. Get out, said the man with the cleaver, his face very pale now. Get out, said the mother, still holding her child. The woman at the pot threw a ladleful of hot, oily pottage at them. Thomas could see in the young father's eyes that he was working himself up to make a real swing at him with the cleaver, and there would be blood if that happened. A lot of blood. I'm sorry, he said, backing out of the door. The old man looked at him from the window across the nearest street, but then moved into the shadows, saying feebly, Go away, leave them alone. Confusion, anger, and guilt wrestled in him. Whore! He screamed. You rotten old whore! Shut your hole, a deep voice from the high window. You're a thief! You should know about thieves around here, Thomas rejoined. He spat on the ground and stomped back to the cart. Nobody followed him. Thomas returned to the cart just as the priest was about to throw the useless key into the street, but the girl said, May I have it? Whatever for? It's pretty. Her simplicity made poor Matthew embarrassed for his anger at having been cheated. He gave it to her, and she smiled up at him. If it made you smile, it's not completely worthless, he said, smiling back at her. I'm glad you two are so goddamn happy, Thomas said. You have food on you, said the girl. Never mind that. Now what? I suppose we sleep in the cart, said the priest. All right, let's pull it away from the shed hole of our boar hood first. A few minutes later, another street, the girl pulled a green ribbon from her sack and tied the key around her neck, then sat back, looking at the last orange light of the sun on the rooftops. That was when she saw the angel. It was neither male or female, but somehow in more beautiful but both somehow and more beautiful than either gender. It asked her to sing a song for it. I don't know if I feel like singing, she said. It asked her to sing anyways. The light was on its beautiful hair, and the whole street suddenly smelled like pine trees and juniper. She sang, a little robin, hey ho, do you sing for me? Hey ho, in your Easter best, with your pretty red chest, do you sing for me? Hey ho. Hey little robin, sing, hey, do you fly to your nest? Sing, hey, to your house of sticks and your pretty little chicks. Do you fly to your nest? Sing, hey, hey down there, said a man from a second floor window. I know that song. Are you from Normandy? The girl nodded. So am I. My mother sang us that on her way to church. I haven't heard it in 12 years or more. My mother sang it to me as well. Are you healthy? The girl nodded and showed him her neck. All three of you? On the blood of our Savior, said the priest. You shouldn't be on the street now. It's nearly dark. Thomas stopped the cart. Do you know what happens after dark? The man continued. We have no place to go, said the girl. The man looked back over his shoulder and exchanged a few words with someone. Then he looked back at them again. I'll feed you, the three of you, if you'll sing for me again. Jehan the Ruin was a woodcarver. He sold wooden statues of Christ and of the saints, but especially Mary. With his first floor shop, he and his wife lived above this. His success meant that they did not share the house with any other family, as most merchants were obliged to. The workshop was neatly kept, except for the old piles of shavings. But the priest felt bad about bringing the mule inside. Jehan insisted. While his guests sat down to table between the kitchen and the workshop, Jehan fetched a bottle of pale spirits, setting out a bowl and pouring some in. He gave it first to the girl. Do you recognize that? She made a face, but nodded. Papa likes that. Everybody's papa likes that in Normandy. It's made from the best apples in France. He shared the bowl around and made a pleasant little fire in their bellies. The priest said it, praising the Arstens figures. Thomas, who recognized their long-headed style, said, Did you make the Christ on this side of the bridge? The woodcarver flushed from pride, hoisting up his heavy eyebrows, which hardly thinned over his nose. I did. A marvelous figure, said the priest. A welcome reminder of Christ's love after the misery at the Hotel de Ville. Actually, the Abbey commissioned it, hoping it would keep the plague out. But we've had a plague, and worse. Worse? The priest asked, not incredulously, but hoping for specifics. You'll sleep in my workshop. Keep the windows closed and barred. If you use the slop jar, don't open the windows to throw it out until morning. They don't come every night, but it's been nearly a week. They're due. What are due? If you hear something heavy treading on the street, pray hard but quietly and stay away from the windows. And if anything knocks, do not open. What knocks? Jehan darted his eyes at the girl, then shook his head and took a deep breath. What comes? We don't know, but nobody who sees them lives. Jehan's wife, Anati, brought out stale bread tritches with the last of their thin soup. Don't be shy about finishing it. We've had ours, she said. Overcome the emotion of her kindness and her plain handsome face, the girl kissed her hand. The wife stroked her hair. The girl suddenly felt the hurt in the woman, how it mirrored her own hurt. One had lost a daughter, the other a mother. Each saw a flicker of the dead one. It was bitter but very sweet and good. Anate took her head into her bosom, tentatively at first, then with great emotion, and cried down in her hair. What are you called, little bird? Delphine. They cried together and held each other as the priest looked at Thomas, and Thomas looked down, deeply ashamed. In their weeks together, neither man had ever asked her name. The liquor was gone soon, and the embers of the fire were cooling. After a hushed consultation with his wife, the woodcarver took his hat in his hands and asked Thomas and the priest if the girl might be allowed to sleep in their bed with Anthony. Janehan would make his bed at the workshop floor with the other men. They nodded. "Thank you," Delphine said, and went upstairs. The priest and Thomas looked at each other, each thinking the same thing. She's home. This is her home now. When the men were all settled on the tightly packed dirt floor, Jehan spoke to them in a whisper. "It's not that nobody has seen those that knock. It's that what they've seen is so awful." "Go on," Thomas said. Mude, a widowed hat maker on the next street, heard the knock and didn't open. But she heard her neighbor, Humbert, open for them and then yell. Her house is old and could see through the space between the beam and the plaster. She said a stone man had Humbert by the hair and bit his nose off. Then it went in, and a stone woman after it. The whole family was killed, bludgeoned, and bitten. The work of the devil. It was dark, yes, the priest said. Of course it was. They only come at night. How could you be sure it was stone? Maybe these were just thieves. There was stone dust and bits of stone in the house from where Herbert's son tried to fight him, and I reckon you could tell a stone man from a man of flesh even in the dark. And what thieves bite people to death? Hungry ones, Thomas said, but neither of the other men found that funny. His sergeant hung in the thick darkness of the woodshop for a long moment, until the mule took a relaxed and ambulant shit on the wood carver's floor. Thomas started to chuckle, and soon the priest and Johann chuckled as well, and then the three of them were trying unsuccessfully to bite back laughter like naughty boys in church. What's so funny down there? Antoinette said. Oh, nothing, June said. One of our guests said he enjoyed his supper. They laughed themselves to sleep. Nothing knocked for them that night. Morning came. The sky was a bright gray that neither threatened rain or nor promised for the possibility of sunshine. But it was welcome after the night the men had spent huddled on the workshop floor listening to the knocks of God knew what. Thomas was first up, and he opened the window enough so that he could try to scrub the worst of the rust off his armor. The sound woke the priest, but the woodcarver snored on, the scent of his Norman apple brandy still spicing his exhalations. The priest sat close to Thomas and spoke quietly to his ear. What are you going to do if the girl stays? She'll stay all right. She's already spreading rushes with the woman and helping her kill fleas over the coverlet. So what will you do? Same as before. Push on. Where? Hadn't thought about it yet. I have. I still want to get to Avignon. Your catamite brother? The priest winced at that, but nodded. There was something flinty about Thomas this morning. You might come with me. In your cart? How else? I might take the cart and leave you here. I couldn't stop you, of course. I know. Don't talk like that. What's gotten into you? I'll talk as it pleases me to talk, but don't look so wounded about the cart. Just because you went out of the orchard and found it doesn't make it yours. I'm not contesting that. I just thought, well, don't think. I do better alone. That's all. I don't know how I found myself tagging behind that little witch in the first place, or with you. I'm damned already, as are you, though you don't realize it just because you got a robe and your cross and your Latin. I don't want anybody's eyes on me if I have to do anything to survive. I see. No, you don't see. What you don't see is that you're a common bugger priest, and she's a skinny little girl who wants her mother, and I'm an outlaw knight who's been formally cut off the sacraments of the church. Death means hell, so I'm going to keep death off of me as long as I can, and I'll do that better in the country than I will do in Paris or Avignon. The wood carver stirred, but then went back to snoring. You're excommunicated? Thomas nodded, then stood up from the floor without the use of his hands, as a fit young squire might have, as if his anger made him youthful. With his brow creased and his eyebrows set belligerently, he looked 30, not 40. He looked like figures of Mars, or Lucifer. He got his sword and sharpened stone and squatted nimbly back on his heels. When? The priest said. Does it matter? I'm just curious. It's so final. Thought I'd let you know before you cried too hard about parting company with me. Why did they do that to you? What do you want? The given reasons? Or the real one? Given first. Heresy, Sodom, blasphemy. The usual things to turn a petty lord's village against them. You don't strike me as a sodomite. Oh, but hearsay and blasphemy sit well, do they? Perhaps blasphemy. You do have a colorful way of expressing their pleasure. But why did they really excommunicate you? To get my land. Why else? Blasphemy is serious. This from the man who took communion from a monkey's head? That really happened? If we both remember it, I'd say yes. The priest's face reddened with shame, and then he looked forlorn. Don't take on so, said Thomas. Nothing cunting matters. That's the way a man talks before he damns himself. It's not the first time I've said it. Tell me what happened. Is our host sleeping soundly? As if to answer the question himself, Jihan the woodcarver exhaled hoarsely with his lips, making a sound like pleh. The priest looked back at Thomas. Tell me. And that's it of chapter 9. That was a good little episode, 40 minutes. I'm pretty proud of that, pretty happy with that. I hope y'all enjoyed the episode. Please comment if you want me to read anything or do anything else. I did figure out how to make a gaming video, so probably next Friday we'll have that up for game night. Hope y'all are excited. And as always, good morning, good evening, good night. I'll see y'all tomorrow.